Stuck at A&E, a bed crunch at public hospitals leaves some patients waiting for hours. And the key election issues to watch for as Malaysia goes to the polls next month. It's Thursday, October 20th. You're watching The Big Story. I'm Haryanto Diman. Subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you will not miss an episode. Singapore's public hospitals are facing a severe bed crunch, so severe that it has spilled over into emergency departments, which stay packed with patients because there is no room to move them elsewhere. ED doctors say there are days when the situation is so bad that an ambulance arriving is unable to discharge the patient for lack of space. Instead, the medical team has to assess the patients while they are on the ambulance trolley. Now, those who are in critical condition are treated immediately. Others might have to wait 15 to 30 minutes before they can be offloaded and the ambulance can leave. This also holds up the ambulance, which might be urgently needed by another critically ill patient. At Changi General Hospital, even for patients who have been admitted, space is so scarce that some less sick or frail patients have to wait in recliner chairs when there are no more beds available. And due to lack of space, beds are sometimes so close to each other that just by stretching out a hand, they can touch the patient in the next bed. ED doctors and nurses told the Straits Times that the problem has been around for years but has become worse this year, partly on account of the surge in COVID-19 cases. The Health Ministry said hospitals will activate measures to mitigate the peak periods of congestion at EDs. It will take measures such as adding more beds to wards and creating holding spaces in EDs. 21 million Malaysians are set to go to the polls next month, with officials targeting a turnout of over 70%. Here's what you need to know about Malaysia's 15th general election. Nomination day on Saturday, November 5th, marks the start of the two-week campaigning period. Polling day on Saturday, November 19th, will see Malaysians choosing a new government, with all 222 parliamentary seats up for grabs. At the same time, three states, Pahang, Perlis and Perak, will hold legislative elections. There are three main coalitions vying to form the next government. The long-ruling Barisan Nasional Alliance, led by current Prime Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob, now BN suffered a shock defeat 4 years ago. The Perikatan Nasional Coalition, led by former PM Muhyiddin Yassin, and Pakatan Harapan, which won in 2018 but lost power 2 years later due to infighting. Anwar Ibrahim currently leads the alliance. Joining us now with more is Senior Fellow and Coordinator of the Malaysia Studies Programme at the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute, Dr. Francis Hutchinson. Welcome to the show, Doctor. What are the key issues for voters, you think, and how will the parties use them to their advantage?
Sure. So I would say three main issues. So the first one is the economy. So of course, we know that the economy is just coming out of the pandemic. And so at this point in time, people have low levels of savings. Also, you had a lot of people tapping into their retirement accounts to access money. And then we also have, of course, because of the war in Ukraine and supply chains, the cost of living increasing very quickly. So as with everywhere, we have steep price rises and salaries are not really keeping up. So the immediate concerns of everyday living are paramount. And here we can expect Barisan Nasional to really kind of play to this. So they did just release a budget very recently, just before Parliament was dissolved. And the idea was to give people kind of a taster of what could happen if they are voted back in. And of course, it was a generous budget with lots and lots of side payments and welfare payments. The second one has to do with governance. And here, this is very much about, the integrity of Malaysia's institutions. So you know that recently, former Prime Minister Najib Razak was sentenced to jail after a very, very lengthy and thorough court proceeding that actually went through all layers of the judicial system. And for many people, this is seen to be a very, very important signal that the country is back on track and is seeking to revamp its institutions. But of course, we do have people in Barisan Nasional clamoring for the former prime minister to be pardoned. We also have the UMNO party president, Zahid Hamidi, who is himself facing charges for corruption. And so this has many people in Pakatan Harapan as well as Perikatan Nasional kind of very much focusing on this and trying to portray themselves as coalitions that are not associated with corruption. And then the last issue is, of course, the timing of the election. Malaysia has a lot of flooding at the end of the year. And really, the argument is why, if there's almost a year that one could wait before going to elections, if Parliament was dissolved mid-July and then you have 60 days before the maximum time is up, this would take us into mid-September. So why now at this point in time, when we have this issue of flooding, we have issues of personal safety, and then of course there is the issue that UMNO party president Zahid Hamidi is awaiting the final verdict of one of his trials for corruption, which is ongoing at this point in time. And if national elections are held, if he's convicted, so they're held afterwards, he is not able to stand or run for office.
I want to talk about the last point that you brought out, the third issue that is on the issue of flooding. It has caused much controversy. Doctor, how much of an impact will this issue have on the election?
So historically, the government has refrained from holding elections in the later part of the year. So when we look at all the parliamentary elections, only 2 have been held in either October or November. And usually the preferred period is from March until August because of this reason. And if we look to early this year, in January, we had widespread flooding in no less than 7 states. So the potential for disruption is, of course, very, very important. The thing is, though, that Barisan Nasional has a very, very important advantage, and that is that they have a motivated core of supporters that will turn up to vote come rain or come shine. So they have very good grassroots networks that really go into communities. They have election workers that will have buses and long boats and all sorts of things to ferry people to actually turn up to vote. Whereas particularly Pakatan Harapan is much more conceptual and relies on people, particularly in urban areas, turning up themselves to vote. So if we have a context where there's, a fair amount of rain, it's disruptive, then actually this would play to Barisan Nasional's advantage. The caveat, though, is if there is a loss of life. And let's say, we know that the elections will be held on the 19th of November, which is quite into November, quite into the monsoon season. So if there is a loss of life in the run-up to the election, then this actually could very much cause blowback against Barisan Nasional.
Doctor, 222 seats are up for grabs. Just to round up our discussion today, which are the main battleground states that you'll be watching for this general election?
So the first area or first state I would look at is actually Kedah. So Kedah is interesting because it is traditionally a state where you have Barisan Nasional competing with PAS. And both of these coalitions actually have quite good grassroots networks in this state. And, the control of the state has gone back and forth. In addition, it is also the home state of former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, and we can expect both him as well as his son Mukris to run again. And you have some presence of Pejuang there. So it will be interesting to see who takes the state and how well Pejuang does. If it doesn't really do very well, then I think this would be the beginning of the end for that party. The second state I would look at would be Perak. So Perak is also quite volatile. It's not like a heartland state that has always been either, Barisan Nasional or Pakatan Harapan. It's gone back and forth in 2008 and 2018. And if you look at the state government there now, you actually have three very clear blocks. So Barisan Nasional, you also have Pakatan Harapan, and then in the middle, you have Perikatan Nasional. So going forward, this would kind of be like a microcosm of Malaysia as a whole, where you see these three states competing against each other. And then lastly, I think Johor is interesting because in 2020, it very much illustrates what we talked about, that Barisan is very disciplined, can rely on a solid core of voters. So it did very well, but it only really did very well because everyone else did very badly. So, it was just coming out of the pandemic. You also didn't have a lot of movement across the border, so you couldn't have outstation people from Singapore showing up to vote. So this time around, if we can see a level of mobilization from Pakatan Harapan, I think that this would also be quite an interesting fight in parliamentary terms. Then the last part of your question is, how do we see Sabah and Sarawak? So usually what will happen is that you've got lots and lots of competition on the peninsula, and then you've got one coalition that's got a solid core of seats, and then it approaches the parties in Sabah and Sarawak to top up and make a solid parliamentary majority. And in this context, Sabah and Sarawak can actually ask for quite a lot of things when it comes to development spending as well as seats in cabinet. So this will be the second part of that dynamic.
Dr. Hutchinson, thank you for your insights. Dr. Francis Hutchinson, Senior Fellow and Coordinator of the Malaysia Studies Programme at the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute. After just 6 weeks in the job, UK Prime Minister Liz Truss's battle for political survival has taken yet another hit. Britain's Interior Minister quit on Wednesday over technical breach of government rules, with a thinly veiled criticism of Truss, who is battling to reassert her authority as lawmakers from her own party openly call on her to quit. The departure of Suella Braverman means Ms. Truss has now lost two of her most senior ministers in less than a week, both replaced by politicians who had not backed her for the leadership. In local news, HDB is prepared to launch up to 100,000 BTO flats from 2021 to 2025 in order to meet strong housing demand, said National Development Minister Desmond Lee in Parliament today. 23,000 flats have been launched per year in 2022 and 2023. Now, addressing concerns about long waits of first-time applicants, Mr. Lee highlighted that BTO flats with shorter waiting times of about 3 years have been offered since 2018. 7,200 were offered between 2020 and 2022, with HDB aiming to launch more.
We had delivered 7,200 over the last 2 years. There has been an impact because BTO demand has been high, and also there's been disruption to construction. And we work hard to raise the quantum of shorter waiting time flats, even as we continue to grapple with the after effects of COVID.
In response to queries about removing the $7,000 income ceiling for the Parenthood Provisional Housing Scheme, which offers temporary housing for couples waiting for their BTO flats, Mr. Lee said there were no plans to do so. He cited limited supply and said that $7,000 was well above the median monthly household income of PPHS applicants. Now, if you are under 50 and over 18, bivalent vaccines will be offered to you later this year. Health Minister Ong Ye Kung said that in addition to the bivalent Moderna Spikevax vaccine currently being offered in vaccination centres, the bivalent Pfizer-BioNTech Comirnaty is also expected to be available by the end of the year.
We have moved to a new system where we stop counting the number of booster shots we take. We are living with the COVID-19 virus. So what we are recommending people now is that two concepts. One, please attain your minimum protection, which is 3 doses of mRNA. Beyond that, take an additional latest vaccine 5 months after your last shot. 5 months after the last shot and no longer than 12 months. So 5 to 12 months. Essentially, for most people, it works out to taking a booster every year. So for your residents 50 and above, please advise them.
The Penal Code Amendment Bill and the Constitution of the Republic of Singapore Bill were introduced today and will be read in Parliament on November 28th. The Penal Code Amendment Bill will repeal Section 377A of the Penal Code, which criminalizes sex between men. The Constitution of the Republic of Singapore Bill will amend the Constitution to protect the current definition of marriage, as well as laws and policies based on this definition from constitutional challenge. And those are our top stories today. Visit straitstimes.com for more news and our YouTube channel for more videos. Subscribe by clicking the red button below. I'm Haryanto Diman. See you tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.